Jim Clark. Tell me about Jim Clark.
I think of all the people, Jim Clark is probably as lamented as most people I think have ever driven here. And I think it's fascinating because the fact that he was a Scotsman and that he sort of came to territory that was very different from his. I mean, I remember being very surprised because my first year was 64 and he'd run the year before. And I just thought, well, they won't like Jim Clark. They like Foyt and Parnelli, and who's this foreigner from overseas driving a rear-engine car. But for some reason, he just endeared himself to everyone, including the other drivers, and very, very highly rated. I think if you talk to Parnelli and Foyt today, and they're really high on Jim Clark. And then, of course, Dario Franchitti famously idolizes him, but Lyondike, Bobby Rahal, I mean, Clark was their boyhood idol. And so he was a Grand Prix driver. He won the World Championship in 1963 and 65. So when he came here the first time, he hadn't won the World Championship yet. But he was on his way to winning it. And he drove a rear-engine Lotus for Colin Chapman, Ford Power, and he finished second behind Parnelli Jones. Parnelli made three stops, and Clark got by on one. And of course, there was this controversy in the late stages about the fact that some oil was seeping from a tiny crack in an oil tank on Parnelli's car, which eventually cleared up. But some people thought, well, Parnelli should have been black flagged, but it would have been pretty hard to black flag the leader, especially when the oil leak stopped after just a few laps. But anyway, so Clark came back the next year. He didn't complain, by the way. He and Parnelli were very close. And then the following year, he was on the pole and went out with a tire problem. The left rear tire, the tread came off the carcass and started lashing away at the suspension. He did a heck of a job saving it to pull down into the infield grass in turn one. He won the 65 race convincingly. He started middle of the front row and he led 190 of the 200 laps. Basically led the whole way except for when he, pit stops. And then in 66, he was second with Granatelli's sponsorship, STP, and he got second behind Graham Hill. And then sadly, his last start was by far the most disappointing. 67, he dropped out early. In 68, he was going to drive one of the wedge turbine-powered cars, Lotus turbine-powered cars, and in fact, he was here just a few days before he was fatally injured to practice the car and figured that he had the winning car. And in fact, the car that he was going to drive was the one that ended up on the pole with Joe Leonard and came down close to winning. But he went back to Europe to run a Formula 2 race at Hockenheim in Germany, and on April the 7th, he was fatally injured.